The crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Montana, in 1875, but Lillian Foster didn't flinch. She'd grown accustomed to the sounds of violence that punctuated life in this frontier town, just as she'd grown accustomed to disappointment. Standing on the porch of her small millinery shop, the 24-year-old woman watched as another body was carried toward the undertakers, another victim of the lawlessness that plagued the West. She turned away, retreating into her shop where colorful ribbons and delicate feathers created a stark contrast to the harsh reality outside her door. "Miss Foster," Sheriff Adams called, tipping his hat as he stepped into her shop later that afternoon. "Thought you should know, got word a cattle drive's coming through. 100 head at least, be here by week's end." Lillian nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff." Cowboys meant business, but they also meant trouble. Men with money to spend and months of isolation behind them rarely behaved like gentlemen. "Might want to hire some help," the sheriff suggested, eyeing the empty shop. "These boys been on the trail 3 months. They'll be eager to spend on pretty things." After he left, Lillian sank into her chair behind the counter. The sheriff meant well, but his warning reminded her of her vulnerability. 3 years ago, she'd arrived in Willow Creek with nothing but determination and the skills her mother had taught her. The millinery shop had been her salvation, a way to support herself without relying on a husband or the other less respectable options available to women alone on the frontier. She'd built something here, something that was hers alone. But it was precarious, balanced on the knife edge of frontier economics and the whims of the townspeople. A good cattle drive could mean the difference between a comfortable winter and one spent counting pennies for coal. The week passed quickly as Lillian prepared for the influx of business. She worked late into each night, crafting new hats and restocking supplies. By Friday morning, the distant lowing of cattle announced the drive's arrival before she could see it. Standing on her porch, Lillian watched as the herd moved slowly along the outskirts of town, a river of brown and white flowing toward the stockyards at the north end. Behind them rode 24 dusty men, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their clothes stiff with the grime of the trail. "Miss Foster," Mrs. Henderson from the general store called as she hurried past. "They say the trail boss is Knox Blackwell himself." Lillian raised an eyebrow. Even she had heard that name. Knox Blackwell had a reputation that stretched across 3 territories, a man who'd started as a simple cowhand and now ran one of the largest operations in Wyoming territory. Stories about him varied wildly. Some claimed he was a gentleman who dealt fairly with everyone he met. Others whispered about his deadly accuracy with a Colt and the men who'd fallen to his gun. By mid-afternoon, the cowboys had settled their herd and begun filtering into town. Lillian's shop door swung open repeatedly as men awkwardly removed their hats and squinted in the feminine surroundings, purchasing gifts for sweethearts back home, or simply enjoying the presence of a respectable woman after months on the trail. She was wrapping a hat box for a shy young cowboy when the bell above her door chimed again. The shop fell instantly silent, and Lillian looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon light. He stepped inside, removing his hat with a fluid motion that spoke of ingrained courtesy rather than conscious thought. Dust coated his clothes, but there was something about the way he carried himself that set him apart from the other cowboys who'd visited that day. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, curling slightly at his collar, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, assessed the shop with calm intelligence. "Miss Foster?" His voice was deep, with the faintest hint of a southern drawl. "Yes," she replied, surprised he knew her name. "Knox Blackwell." He inclined his head slightly. "Your shop comes highly recommended by Mrs. Henderson." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell." Lillian finished tying the ribbon on her customer's package and handed it over with a smile. The young cowboy nearly tripped in his haste to leave the shop, clearly intimidated by his boss's presence. Once they were alone, Blackwell approached the counter, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "I find myself in need of your expertise, Miss Foster." "Oh." She kept her expression professional, though her curiosity was piqued. "My sister is expecting her first child this winter." A smile softened his weathered features. "I'd like to bring her something special, something that might brighten the long months ahead." There was something unexpected in his manner, a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation. Lillian found herself responding to it despite her usual caution around strange men. "Does she have a favorite color?" Lillian asked, moving toward her display of ladies' hats. "Blue," he answered without hesitation. "Like forget-me-nots." For the next half hour, Lillian showed him various options, surprised by his thoughtful questions and genuine interest in making the perfect selection. Most men viewed such shopping as a chore to be completed as quickly as possible. "This one," he finally decided, pointing to an elegant bonnet trimmed with pale blue ribbons and tiny silk flowers. "It reminds me of something our mother used to wear." As Lillian wrapped the hat, she found herself speaking more freely than she normally would with a stranger. "It's kind of you to think of your sister. Family is everything, Miss Foster." His eyes met hers, and something in their depths, a shared understanding, perhaps made her breath catch. "Especially out here." "Yes," she agreed softly, thinking of her own family, lost to typhoid 5 years earlier. "Especially out here." When he paid, he added a generous tip that Lillian tried to refuse. "For your time and expertise," he insisted. "We'll be in town a week while I negotiate with the buyers. Perhaps I might call on you again." The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond a simple business transaction. Lillian hesitated, torn between caution and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this man. "My shop is open every day but Sunday, Mr. Blackwell." He smiled, and it transformed his face, erasing years of hardship and revealing a glimpse of the young man he must have been before the frontier shaped him. "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Foster." True to his word, Knox returned the following day, this time without a specific purchase in mind. He browsed the shop while Lillian helped other customers, occasionally asking questions about particular items that revealed his genuine interest in her work. When the shop emptied, he approached the counter again. "Would you consider joining me for supper at the hotel dining room this evening, Miss Foster?" The invitation surprised her. Men had asked before, of course, but she'd always declined, protecting both her reputation and her heart. Something about Knox Blackwell made her want to break her own rules. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackwell, but I couldn't possibly—" "I understand your hesitation," he interrupted gently. "A lady must be careful of her reputation. Perhaps Mrs. Henderson might accompany us as a chaperone. I believe she mentioned being acquainted with your family back in Pennsylvania." The fact that he'd thought of her reputation, that he'd found a respectable solution rather than pressing his advantage, intrigued Lillian further. "I'll ask her," she found herself saying, though a warning voice in her mind reminded her of all the reasons to keep her distance from a man like Knox Blackwell, a man who would ride out of town in a week, returning to a life that had no place for a milliner from Willow Creek. That evening, seated across from Knox in the hotel's modest dining room with Mrs. Henderson providing proper chaperonage, Lillian learned more about the cattle drive and the challenges of bringing a herd safely across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory. "Lost 12 head at the river crossing," Knox explained, his expression grim, "and nearly lost 2 men. The spring floods made the current treacherous." "Yet you got most of your men and cattle through safely," Lillian observed. "That speaks well of your leadership." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "A man does what's necessary." As the meal progressed, their conversation moved to more personal topics. Knox spoke of his ranch in Wyoming, the small but growing operation he'd built over the past 8 years. Lillian found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania and her journey west after her parents' death. "It was foolish, perhaps," she admitted. "A woman traveling alone, but I couldn't see any future for myself there." "Not foolish," Knox said, his blue eyes serious. "Brave." It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind and forge a new path. Mrs. Henderson, who had been quietly enjoying her dessert, smiled knowingly between them. "Sometimes the best futures are the ones we build for ourselves," she said, "though having the right partner certainly helps." Lillian blushed at the older woman's not-so-subtle hint, but Knox merely nodded thoughtfully. "The right partner is indeed invaluable," he agreed, "in business and in life." Their evening ended with Knox escorting both women back to their respective homes. At Lillian's door, he paused. "I enjoyed your company greatly, Miss Foster." "As did I, Mr. Blackwell." The admission came more easily than she expected. "Knox," he corrected gently. "My friends call me Knox, then you must call me Lillian." The words felt significant somehow, as if she were crossing a boundary she'd carefully maintained for years. "Lillian," he repeated, and her name in his mouth sounded like something precious. "Good night." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time: hope. The next few days fell into a pattern. Knox would visit her shop in the afternoon, sometimes purchasing small items to send home with his men, other times simply talking with her during quiet moments. In the evenings, they would dine together, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Henderson or occasionally by the minister's wife. On the fourth day, Knox arrived at her shop looking troubled. "There's been a complication," he explained after the last customer had left. "The buyer is attempting to renegotiate our agreed price. I may need to stay in town longer than anticipated." Lillian tried to ignore the leap of pleasure his words caused. "I'm sorry for your business troubles." "I'm not entirely sorry," he admitted, his eyes holding hers. "It means more time in Willow Creek." More time with you remained unspoken between them. That evening, instead of dining at the hotel, Knox suggested a picnic by the creek that gave the town its name. Mrs. Henderson agreed to accompany them, bringing along her knitting as she settled on a bench within sight but not hearing distance. Seated on a blanket spread beneath a cottonwood tree, Lillian felt a freedom she rarely experienced within the confines of the town's watchful eyes. "Tell me about your dreams, Lillian," Knox said as they watched the water flow past. "Beyond the millinery shop." The question caught her off guard. Few people, especially men, had ever asked about her ambitions. "I'd like to open a proper ladies' boutique someday," she admitted. "Not just hats, but dresses, accessories, everything a woman might need to feel beautiful, even out here on the frontier." Knox nodded, his expression serious. "Women deserve beauty in their lives, especially here where so much is harsh and unforgiving." "What about you?" she asked. "What are your dreams beyond the cattle ranch?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "A home," he finally said. "Not just a house or a business, but a true home, children, a legacy beyond acres and cattle." "A wife?" Lillian asked softly, his eyes met hers intense and unwavering. "Yes. But not just any woman, someone strong enough for frontier life, gentle enough to make a house a home. Someone with dreams of her own that could grow alongside mine." The description hung in the air between them, and Lillian felt her heart beating faster. This was dangerous territory, hopes and possibilities that could vanish like morning mist when Knox rode out of town. "Such women are rare on the frontier," she said carefully. "Yes," he agreed. "Very rare indeed." The following day brought an unexpected crisis. Lillian was closing her shop when Sheriff Adams burst through the door, his expression grim. "Miss Foster, you need to come quick. There's been an accident at the saloon. Young Mary's been hurt bad." Lillian's heart sank. Mary Wilson was only 16, working at the Silver Dollar to support her younger siblings after their father's death in a mining accident. Despite the girl's unfortunate circumstances, Lillian had taken an interest in her, teaching her to read during quiet afternoons. "What happened?" Lillian asked as she grabbed her shawl and hurried after the sheriff. "Fight broke out between some locals and the trail hands. Mary got caught in the middle, pushed through the railing on the upper floor." The scene at the saloon was chaotic shouting men, broken furniture, and in the center of it all, Mary lying motionless on a table that had been cleared for her. Dr. Fletcher was bent over her, his expression grave. "Lillian," Mary cried weakly upon seeing her. It hurt something awful. Pushing through the crowd, Lillian took the girl's hand. "I'm here, Mary. You're going to be fine." Dr. Fletcher motioned Lillian aside, broken arm, possibly some ribs as well. "I need to move her to my office, but she's frightened and asking for you." "I'll come with you," Lillian assured him. As they prepared to move Mary, the saloon doors swung open and Knox entered, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. Behind him followed several of his men, their faces grim. "Which one of you is responsible for this?" Knox demanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a whip. The saloon fell silent. Knox's eyes swept the room, settling on a tall cowboy with a bruised face, one of his own men. "Parker," Knox said quietly but with unmistakable authority. "Outside, now." The man slunk out, followed by Knox. Lillian wanted to see what would happen, but Mary's whimper drew her attention back to the injured girl. "I'm scared, Miss Foster," Mary whispered. "I know, dear." Lillian smoothed the hair from the girl's forehead. "But I'll be right beside you." It was nearly midnight by the time Mary had been treated and settled in a room behind the doctor's office. Lillian emerged exhausted, worried about the girl's younger siblings who were alone in their small cabin at the edge of town. To her surprise, Knox was waiting outside, leaning against a hitching post. "How is she?" he asked, straightening as Lillian approached. "She'll recover, but she's in considerable pain," Lillian sighed. "I need to check on her brother and sister. They are alone and probably terrified." "I've already sent Mrs. Henderson to stay with them," Knox said, "and I've dealt with Parker. He's been dismissed from my employ and instructed to leave town immediately." Lillian stared at him, touched by his thoughtfulness and efficiency. "Thank you, that's very kind. It's the least I could do. One of my men was involved." His expression was solemn. "I don't tolerate that kind of behavior, especially toward young women." They walked in silence toward Lillian's home, the night air cool against her skin. "You care for that girl," Knox observed. "Mary reminds me of myself at her age alone, making difficult choices to survive." Lillian's voice caught, "But her circumstances are far worse than mine ever were." "What will happen to her and her siblings?" Lillian shook her head. "I don't know. The town helps where it can, but resources are limited." They reached her door and Knox hesitated before speaking again. "I'm leaving tomorrow." The buyer finally agreed to our original terms. Though she'd been expecting it, the news still felt like a physical blow. Lillian struggled to maintain her composure. "I wish you safe travels then, Lillian." Knox's voice was different, softer, uncertain. "I'd like to write to you if you would permit it." Hope fluttered in her chest, but experience had taught her caution. "To what end, Knox? To know you better. To share my thoughts with someone who understands them." He stepped closer, his eyes earnest in the moonlight. "These past days with you have meant more to me than I can properly express." "Letters are just words on paper," she said, though she wanted desperately to believe they could be more. "Men make promises easily when leaving town. I'm not most men." There was no arrogance in his statement, just quiet certainty. "Ask anyone who knows me, Lillian. My word is my bond." She wanted to believe him. Against all reason and past experience, she wanted to trust that this man was different. "Very well," she finally said. "You may write." The smile that spread across his face was worth the risk to her heart. "Thank you. I'll write as soon as I reach the ranch." Impulsively, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, a gesture so courtly and unexpected that Lillian felt her cheeks flush. "Good night, Lillian Foster. Dream of good things." The following morning, Lillian watched from her shop window as Knox led his men and their remaining cattle out of town. He paused at the crossroads, turning in his saddle to look back toward her shop. Though the distance was too great to see his expression clearly, she raised her hand in farewell and saw him touch the brim of his hat in response before riding away. Life in Willow Creek returned to its normal rhythms after the excitement of the cattle drive. Lillian divided her time between her shop and caring for Mary and her siblings, helping the girl recover while teaching her younger brother and sister their letters. 3 weeks after Knox's departure, the first letter arrived. Lillian's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, half expecting a brief, polite note the kind men sent to ease their conscience before forgetting women they'd left behind. Instead, she found 4 pages filled with Knox's surprisingly elegant handwriting, describing his journey home, the condition of his ranch after his long absence, and his thoughts about their conversations in Willow Creek. He asked questions about her, about Mary's recovery, about her shop, genuine questions that showed he remembered the details she'd shared. Lillian read the letter 3 times before sitting down to compose her reply, allowing herself to be more open in writing than she'd been in person. Something about committing her thoughts to paper, knowing days would pass before he read them, gave her the courage to share parts of herself she usually kept hidden. Their correspondence continued through the autumn and into winter. Each letter from Knox revealed more of the man behind the reputation, his struggles building his ranch from nothing, his hopes for the future, his thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. In return, Lillian shared her dreams for expanding her business, her concerns for Mary's family, her memories of life before the frontier changed her. In December, a package arrived along with his usual letter. Inside, Lillian found a leather-bound copy of Tennyson's poems and a small wooden box containing a silver brooch shaped like a forget-me-not. His letter explained. "The poems reminded me of our conversation by the creek. The brooch reminded me of your eyes when you speak of things that matter to you. Consider it an early Christmas gift, with no obligations attached save that you think of me occasionally when wearing it." Lillian pressed the brooch to her heart, allowing herself to acknowledge what she'd been trying to deny for months. She was falling in love with a man who existed primarily on paper, a man who lived hundreds of miles away, a man whose life was as different from hers as it was possible to be. January brought heavy snows that isolated Willow Creek for weeks at a time. Mail deliveries became sporadic, and Lillian found herself watching anxiously for the post rider, counting the days between Knox's letters with growing concern. When nearly a month passed without word, she began to fear the worst. Had he tired of their correspondence, met someone else? Or had something happened to him, an accident on the dangerous winter trails, illness, or worse? February arrived with bitter cold and no letters. Lillian threw herself into her work, expanding her inventory to include gloves and scarves she crafted during the long evenings. She helped Mary secure a respectable position as an assistant at the school, now that the girl had recovered and improved her reading skills. On a particularly harsh day in late February, when wind howled through the cracks in her shop windows and few customers braved the weather, the bell above her door chimed. Lillian looked up, expecting Mrs. Henderson or perhaps the minister's wife, the only people likely to venture out in such conditions. Instead, Knox Blackwell stood in her doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, his face reddened from the cold. Lillian froze, certain she was imagining him. "Knox, Lillian." He removed his hat, revealing hair that had grown longer since she'd last seen him. "Forgive me for arriving unannounced." She moved toward him as if in a dream. "Your letters stopped coming. There was an incident at the ranch." He stepped closer and she could see now the healing cut along his jawline. "Rustlers. They burned the barn where I kept my correspondence. Your letters, I'm sorry they were lost." "You're hurt," she said, reaching involuntarily toward the wound on his face. "It's nothing." He caught her hand gently. "I couldn't write to explain we've been rebuilding, tracking the men responsible, but I couldn't bear the thought of you believing I'd simply stopped writing. So you came all this way in February through mountain passes." Lillian couldn't finish the thought, overwhelmed by what his presence meant. "I would have come sooner if I could." His eyes never left hers. "Lillian, these past months of letters, getting to know you, sharing my thoughts with you, they've meant everything to me." They've meant everything to me too, she admitted softly. I had a speech prepared, Knox said with a small smile. All the way from Wyoming I practiced what I would say when I saw you again, but now that I'm here standing before you the words seem inadequate. Lillian's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Try, she whispered. Please. Knox took a deep breath. I love you, Lillian Foster. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you look at the world, seeing both its harshness and its beauty. I love that you created something meaningful here, on your own terms. Tears filled Lillian's eyes as the words she'd both longed for and feared washed over her. I know this is sudden, he continued. I know there are 1,000 practical reasons why this is madness. My ranch is 500 miles from here. Your business, your life is in Willow Creek, but I had to tell you face to face that you have become essential to me. Knox, she began, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. Let me finish, please. I'm not asking you to abandon everything you've built. I would never ask that of you, but I am asking if there might be a future where our separate dreams could become something shared. Are you proposing marriage, Mr. Blackwell? Lillian asked, her voice unsteady. I'm proposing possibility, Miss Foster. His smile was tender. I'm asking for time to court you properly, time to determine if what we feel through letters can withstand the realities of life. And yes, if that time confirms what I already believe in my heart, then I would very much like to make you my wife. Lillian took a step back, overwhelmed. This was everything she'd secretly hoped for during those months of correspondence, yet now that it was happening, doubt crept in. You don't really know me, she said quietly, not truly. A few days in town, some letters, that's not enough to base a life on. I know enough, Knox insisted. I know you're the first person I want to tell when something significant happens in my life. I know your words bring me comfort on difficult days. I know that since leaving Willow Creek, I've measured every woman I've met against you and found them wanting. And what about my shop, my life here? The practical questions helped steady her against the tide of emotion threatening to sweep her away. That's what I mean about taking time, Knox explained. I'll stay in Willow Creek for 2 weeks. We'll talk about everything. Your business, my ranch, how a future might work between us. No decisions need to be made today. It was reasonable, thoughtful, like everything about Knox Blackwell. He wasn't asking her to abandon her independence on a romantic whim. He was suggesting they explore possibilities together. 2 weeks, she agreed finally, and then we'll see. The smile that illuminated his face warmed her more effectively than any fire could have in the bitter February cold. Those 2 weeks changed everything. Knox integrated himself into Lillian's daily life, helping at her shop, accompanying her on visits to Mary's family, joining her for meals and walks through town. They talked endlessly about practical matters like finances and business, about philosophical questions of duty and desire, about their hopes for the future and fears from the past, in the evenings, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Henderson. They sat before the fire in Lillian's small parlor and built castles in the air, dreams of what might be if they were brave enough to reach for it. The south-facing slope would be perfect for a kitchen garden, Knox said one night as he described his ranch. And there's a grove of cottonwoods by the creek that reminds me of where we had our picnic. It sounds beautiful, Lillian said, trying to imagine herself in such a place so different from the town where she'd built her life. There's a settlement growing about 10 miles from the ranch, he continued. Nothing like Willow Creek yet, but people are coming. They'll need the things you make. You've thought about this, she realized, about how I might continue my work there, of course. Knox looked surprised that she would doubt it. Your business is part of who you are, Lillian. I wouldn't ask you to abandon it. Mrs. Henderson smiled approvingly over her knitting. A man who values a woman's work is a rare find, my dear. Yet despite the growing certainty in her heart, Lillian still hesitated. One evening, as their 2 weeks neared their end, she finally voiced the fear that had haunted her. What if I'm not enough? She asked quietly. What if you bring me to your ranch and discover I'm not the woman you imagined from my letters? Knox's expression grew serious. Lillian, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I fell in love with you here in Willow Creek, watching you care for Mary after she was hurt, seeing how you built a life for yourself through determination and skill. The letters deepened that love, but they didn't create it. But ranch life is so different. Yes, it is, he acknowledged. And it will be an adjustment. There will be difficulties, disappointments, days when we both wonder if we've made a terrible mistake. That's true of any marriage, any partnership. Then why do it? The question emerged from her deepest insecurities. Why risk so much? Because the alternative is worse. Knox leaned forward, his eyes intense. Living separate lives, always wondering what might have been if we'd been braver. I've faced down rustlers and raging rivers, Lillian. I've survived blizzards and drought. But the thought of losing you before I've truly had the chance to love you, that terrifies me more than anything. His words penetrated the walls she'd built around her heart. Here was a man who saw her clearly not as a possession to be acquired or a convenience to be used, but as a partner to be cherished, complexities and all. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, but of failing, of not being the woman you deserve. Oh, Lillian, Knox's voice softened. That's the great irony. I lie awake wondering if I'm worthy of you. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. If I may offer an observation, she set down her knitting. In my 67 years, I've seen many marriages. The ones that last aren't those between perfect people who never doubt or struggle. They're between two imperfect souls who choose each other, day after day, especially when it's difficult. The older woman's wisdom hung in the air between them. I choose you, Lillian Foster, Knox said simply. Today and every day hereafter if you'll have me. In that moment, the final barriers around Lillian's heart crumbled. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I choose you too. Knox proposed formally the next day, offering a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small pearl. They agreed to a spring wedding, giving Lillian time to arrange her affairs in Willow Creek and Knox time to prepare the ranch for her arrival. I'll return in April, he promised as they stood on the station platform. The bitter weather had finally broken, allowing him to begin the journey home. With the preacher's blessing, we'll be married by May Day. I'll be waiting, Lillian said, fighting tears as the train whistle sounded, with everything settled here. Their parting was bittersweet, painful to separate after finding each other, yet full of anticipation for the future they would build together. True to his word, Knox's letters resumed as soon as he reached the ranch, arriving weekly with news of his preparations. He described the improvements he was making to the main house, the reaction of his foreman and ranch hands to news of his impending marriage, his plans for expanding the herd that spring. Lillian, meanwhile, began the difficult process of transferring her business. After considering several options, she decided to sell the shop to Mary, who had shown a natural aptitude for the work during her recovery. Lillian would provide the initial inventory and training, while the girl's improved circumstances and education made her well-positioned to succeed. You're giving me a future, Miss Foster, Mary said tearfully when Lillian proposed the arrangement. How can I ever repay you? By making this shop everything it can be, Lillian replied, embracing the girl who had become like a sister to her. And by writing to me regularly with news of Willow Creek. As April approached, Lillian found herself counting the days until Knox's return. Despite her certainty about their decision, occasional doubts still surfaced, usually in the quiet hours before dawn when old fears spoke loudest. What if the reality of marriage to Knox, of life on a remote ranch, proved different from the dream they'd constructed through letters and conversations? What if her business skills weren't enough to establish herself in a new community? What if she disappointed him? Each time these thoughts emerged, Lillian reminded herself of Knox's words, I choose you. Not a perfect, idealized version of her, but the real woman with all her complexities and contradictions. It was a powerful antidote to doubt. 3 days before Knox was due to arrive, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the livery stable next to Lillian's shop, spreading quickly to her building before the bucket brigade could contain it. She awoke to shouts and the acrid smell of smoke, barely escaping with a few personal belongings before the roof collapsed. By morning, both buildings were smoldering ruins. Lillian stood in the street, a blanket around her shoulders, watching as townspeople sifted through the debris, searching for anything salvageable. "Most of your inventory is lost," Sheriff Adams reported grimly. "I'm sorry, Miss Foster. If we'd had more warning." "No one was hurt," Lillian said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's what matters." Mrs. Henderson arrived, bringing hot coffee and practical comfort. "You'll stay with me until Knox arrives," she declared. "We'll salvage what we can for your trousseau." The community rallied around her. Women brought clothing to replace what she'd lost. Men offered to help clear the debris. Mary appeared with tears streaming down her face. "What will happen now?" the girl asked. "To the shop, to our plan," Lillian hugged her. "We'll find another way, Mary." This changes the method, not the goal. Privately, though, Lillian worried. The shop had represented her independence, her contribution to her future with Knox. Now she would arrive at his ranch with little more than the clothes on her back, exactly the dependent bride she had never wanted to be. When Knox stepped off the train 3 days later, his expression darkened at the sight of the burned buildings. He found Lillian at Mrs. Henderson's house, packing the few belongings she'd salvaged and the donations from townspeople into a trunk. "I came as soon as I heard," he said, taking her into his arms. "Are you all right?" "I wasn't hurt," she assured him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "That's not what I asked." Knox pulled back to study her face. "Lillian, talk to me. Tell me what you're thinking." The gentleness in his voice broke something loose inside her. "I'm coming to you with nothing," she said, the words rushing out. "Everything I built, everything that made me who I am, it's gone. I have no business, no inventory to establish myself at your ranch. I'm exactly what I never wanted to be, a woman dependent on her husband's charity." "Stop." Knox's voice was firm but kind. "Look at me, Lillian." He waited until she raised her eyes to his. "Do you think I love you for your shop, for your inventory, or your business skills?" "No, but those things are part of you, yes, but they're not what make you who you are." His hands framed her face. "Your determination, your kindness, your intelligence fire can't touch those things. They're coming with you to Wyoming, along with your skill and experience." "But my contribution to our marriage is you," Knox finished. "Just you. Everything else can be rebuilt, replaced, reimagined. But you, Lillian Foster, are irreplaceable to me." His words pierced the cloud of despair that had surrounded her since the fire. Lillian leaned into his embrace, allowing herself to accept the comfort he offered. "Besides," Knox continued, stroking her hair, "this changes nothing about our plans except perhaps the timing." "If you need more time here to settle things, no," Lillian interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "No, there's nothing keeping me in Willow Creek now. Mary can start fresh with the insurance money when it comes. I've taught her everything I know." Knox smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "Then shall we proceed with our wedding as planned? The minister is expecting us tomorrow morning." Despite the loss of her carefully planned trousseau, Lillian married Knox Blackwell the next day, wearing a blue dress hastily altered by the town's seamstress. Mrs. Henderson provided a lace collar that had been her own mother's, and Mary brought a bouquet of early spring wildflowers gathered from the creek banks. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, witnessed by the friends who had become Lillian's family during her years in Willow Creek. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Knox kissed her with a tenderness that promised far more than passion. It promised partnership, respect, and a lifetime of being chosen, day after day. They left for Wyoming that afternoon, the train carrying them north and west toward their new life together. Seated beside Knox as the landscape changed from rolling plains to distant mountains, Lillian felt a strange mixture of grief for what she'd lost and anticipation for what lay ahead. "Second thoughts?" Knox asked quietly, noticing her pensive expression as she gazed out the window. No, she answered truthfully. Just adjusting, everything has happened so quickly. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. We have time now, Lillian. All the time we need to build something new together. The journey took 3 days, with overnight stops at hotels along the way. Each evening, Lillian discovered new aspects of the man she'd married: his consideration in small matters, his easy conversation with strangers, his quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. And each night, as they learned the intimate language of marriage behind closed doors, she discovered the depth of his tenderness, the way he cherished her body as reverently as he valued her mind and spirit. On the 4th day, they transferred to a stagecoach for the final leg of their journey. By late afternoon, Knox pointed to a distant ridge. There, he said, his voice warm with pride. Blackwell land begins at that cottonwood stand and runs west to the mountains and north to the river. Lillian leaned forward, taking in the expanse of rolling grassland dotted with cattle, the distant glint of water and the purple shadows of mountains beyond. It was beautiful in its wildness, so different from the more settled landscape around Willow Creek. It's magnificent, she said sincerely. Knox squeezed her hand. Wait until you see the house. An hour later, the stagecoach turned onto a well-maintained road that wound through a grove of trees and emerged in a clearing where a substantial 2-story house stood. Built of logs and local stone, it had a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and windows that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Oh, Knox. Lillian stared at what would be her new home. It was larger and more impressive than she had imagined from his descriptions. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwell, he said softly as the coach came to a stop. Before she could respond, the front door opened and people spilled out onto the porch: a tall, lean man with graying hair who must be the foreman Knox had mentioned, a plump, middle-aged woman wiping her hands on an apron, and 3 or 4 cowboys who hung back respectfully. Knox helped Lillian down from the coach, then turned to make introductions. Everyone, this is my wife, Lillian. Lillian, this is Jim Harker, my foreman, Mrs. Beatrice Collins, our housekeeper, and some of our hands: Tom, Charlie, Miguel, and Jeremiah. Welcome, Mrs. Blackwell, Jim said, touching his hat brim. Boss has talked of nothing else since winter. Mrs. Collins bustled forward. Come in. You must be exhausted from your journey. I've prepared the master bedroom and have supper nearly ready. As they entered the house, Lillian was struck by its surprisingly refined interior. The main room featured comfortable furniture arranged around a massive stone fireplace, bookshelves lined one wall, and colorful rugs softened the plank floors. It was a home that combined frontier practicality with unexpected touches of elegance. Knox, it's lovely, she said, turning to take it all in. I had help, he admitted. Mrs. Collins has better taste than I do, but I chose the books. He gestured toward the well-stocked shelves. And this, he led her toward a door off the main room, this I prepared especially for you. He opened the door to reveal a bright room with windows on 2 sides. A large desk stood beneath one window and shelves lined the walls. In one corner, a sewing table held a new Singer sewing machine. Bolts of fabric were stacked neatly on adjacent shelves, alongside boxes of ribbons, feathers, and other millinery supplies. I know it can't replace what you lost, Knox said, watching her face anxiously. But I thought you might want a place to begin again when you're ready. Lillian moved into the room, touching the sewing machine, the fabrics, the supplies all new, all chosen with obvious care. Tears filled her eyes as she realized what this represented, not just materials for a business, but Knox's absolute commitment to her independence and her dreams. How did you do this? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. How did you know? Your letters, he explained. You described your shop, your materials, your methods. I tried to remember everything. Mrs. Collins helped with selecting the fabrics. I admit I was lost there. It's perfect, Lillian whispered. Absolutely perfect. There's a settlement growing about 10 miles west, Knox continued. Nothing like Willow Creek yet, but there are already 15 families and more coming with the railroad. No one there makes hats or dresses of quality. When you're ready, if you want, there's opportunity." Lillian turned to her husband, seeing in his face everything she had ever hoped for but never truly believed she would find: respect, understanding, partnership. This man had listened to her dreams and made them part of his vision for their shared future. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what she felt. "You're welcome." Knox stepped closer, his expression serious. "Lillian, I want you to be happy here. I want this to be a true home for both of us. Whatever you need to make that happen, just tell me." "I have everything I need," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "Everything and more." He smiled, the expression transforming his features in the way that had first captured her attention in her shop nearly a year before. "I love you, Lillian Blackwell." "And I love you," she replied, realizing as she said it that the words had become easy, natural, a truth as fundamental as breathing. "More than I ever thought possible." Their first weeks of marriage established patterns that would serve them well in the years to come. Knox included Lillian in discussions about the ranch operations, valuing her practical business sense. She quickly formed a good working relationship with Mrs. Collins, taking over management of the household while respecting the older woman's experience. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, or before the fire reading aloud from their growing library. Knox proved to be a thoughtful, attentive husband interested in her opinions, supportive of her ambitions, and tenderly passionate in their private moments. Yet despite the harmony of their new life together, Lillian sometimes caught herself waiting for disappointment. Experience had taught her that happiness was fleeting, that people eventually revealed their true nature, and it was rarely as kind or noble as first appearances suggested. Knox noticed her occasional withdrawal, the moments when she seemed to brace herself against some invisible threat. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, he finally addressed it directly. "You're still waiting for me to change, aren't you?" He asked gently. "To become someone different from the man you married." Lillian's breath caught at his perceptiveness. "I'm sorry, it's not that I don't trust you, it's just, you've been disappointed before." It wasn't a question. Not just by circumstances, but by people. She nodded, unable to deny it. "My father was difficult, charming in public, admired by everyone, but at home he was a different man. My mother spent 20 years walking on eggshells trying to anticipate his moods." "I'm not your father, Lillian." Knox took her hand. "I won't pretend I'm perfect. I have my flaws. I can be stubborn, sometimes too focused on work. I'll make mistakes. But I will never, ever deliberately hurt you or make you feel less than the remarkable woman you are." "I know that here," Lillian said, touching her head. "It's just taking my heart a little longer to fully believe it." "Then I'll spend however long it takes proving it to you," Knox promised. "Every day in every way I can," and he did. Through spring roundup and summer heat, through the busiest seasons on the ranch when he came home exhausted and dust-covered, Knox remained the man she had married: considerate, communicative, a true partner. By late summer, Lillian had established herself in the growing settlement of Pine Creek. Starting with hat-making, she gradually expanded to dressmaking as word of her skill spread among the frontier women hungry for a touch of fashion and beauty in their practical lives. Knox built her a small shop on their weekly visits to town, where she could meet with customers and display her work. It wasn't the elaborate boutique she had once dreamed of, but it was hers, a symbol of her independence within their partnership. In October, as golden aspen leaves drifted down around their home and the first hint of winter sharpened the air, Lillian confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was expecting their first child. When she told Knox, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. He lifted her gently, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A baby," he said in wonder, his hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Are you pleased?" She asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Please doesn't begin to describe it. His eyes met hers, bright with emotion. Lillian, you've given me everything I ever wanted: a true partnership, a home filled with love, and now a family. How could I be anything but overjoyed? That night, lying beside him in their bed, Lillian realized something had shifted within her. The last remnants of doubt, the lingering fear that her happiness might be snatched away, had finally dissolved. In its place was a deep, abiding certainty, not that life would be perfect or without challenges, but that she and Knox would face whatever came together as true partners. "I believe you now," she whispered into the darkness. Knox stirred beside her. "Believe what?" "That this is real." "That you're real." She found his hand and brought it to rest over her heart. "That I'm worthy of this happiness." He propped himself up on one elbow, his face visible in the moonlight streaming through their window. "You've always been worthy, Lillian, always. I'm just grateful I was the man fortunate enough to help you see it." "It took time," she admitted. "Learning to trust, to believe that someone could love me completely, not despite my independence but because of it." Knox smiled, the expression tender in the silvery light. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done. Convincing you to believe in that love, that was the challenge." "But you did it," Lillian said softly. "With patience and kindness and unwavering constancy, you loved me with everything you had until I finally believed I was worth it." "And I'll keep loving you that way," Knox promised, "every day for the rest of our lives." As snow blanketed the Wyoming landscape that winter, Lillian Blackwell found herself surrounded by everything she had once thought beyond her reach: a loving husband who valued her exactly as she was, a thriving business that allowed her to express her creativity, a comfortable home that was truly hers, and the promise of a child to expand their family circle. The journey from solitary shopkeeper to beloved wife and mother-to-be had not been straightforward or without obstacles. But as she stood on the porch of their home on Christmas morning, Knox's arm around her waist and his hand protective over the slight swell of their growing child, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not by surrendering her independence, but by choosing to share it with a man who recognized her true worth and loved her completely. In the years that followed, through the birth of their children, the expansion of the ranch, and the inevitable challenges of frontier life, that certainty never wavered. Knox Blackwell had indeed loved her with everything he had, and Lillian had finally, completely believed she was worth it. Their love story became a quiet legend in that corner of Wyoming territory, not for dramatic rescues or overcome obstacles, but for its steadfast quality, its respectful partnership, its proof that even on the rugged frontier, true love could flourish between two people who chose each other, day after day, year after year. And on warm summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Knox and Lillian could still be seen sitting together on their porch, her hand in his, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky with colors as vibrant and enduring as the love they had built together.